welcome all of you, colleagues, friends, whatever you are. It's difficult to know, but I hear that there are people obviously from all across the Caribbean, possibly North America, and I think even Australia. I'm not sure about Europe, Asia, or Africa. But welcome to all of you and to this virtual presentation of a special issue of the Journal of Caribbean History, a Festschrift. I've been practicing the word and hopefully I will not get it wrong. This is this special presentation of this, virtual presentation of this special issue. It's the departments of, it's the way in which like the departments of history at the UWI, the departments of history in Cayville, Barbados, St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago, and Mona, Jamaica, have to celebrate the contribution and service of our colleague, Emeritus Professor Carl Campbell. Carl. This Festschrift and this event are the brainchild of the journal's editor, Professor Kathleen Monteith. But it is my honor to be here chairing this event and pay homage to one of our elders. And I mean elder in the Bantu sense of the word. This is usually an old man or woman, but above all is a wise person. That's what makes you an elder, not necessarily the age. So, colleagues here who are going to be participating over the next 60 minutes in this event have much more to say about Professor Campbell. Still, because of the elderly status, it's difficult for me to call him Carl. So I will restrict my role to simply chair the session. The program has been circulated, as you know, in advance, but as you probably know also, there has been a last-minute change. We have another person who is going to participate in offering or giving his remarks, and this is the Vice Chancellor Professor Hilary Beckles. You will see it obviously in this program that was circulated earlier on today. Obviously, this is a last-minute change, and we could not say no to this last-minute request to participate in this event, given his position. He is the boss after all. But more importantly, we could not say no either, because it is most appropriate as a historian, a member of our departments of history, and obviously also his close and long relationship with Professor Campbell. So, from now on, I will simply give way to colleagues so they can offer their brief remarks. I was told, and I will need to insist on this, that you try to give these brief remarks as in 5 minutes maximum, so we can keep this within the slotted 60 minutes that we have prepared for this event. Before we begin, let me remind you once again to keep your microphones mute and enjoy our celebration of Professor Carl Campbell. Professor Monteith.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy. Welcome all. Special recognition of the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Special recognition of the guest editor of this Festschrift. Also recognizing Professor Emeritus Brian Moore. And I think I see Professor Woodfield Marshall and of course Professor Roy Auger, also members of the editorial board, as well as other members, colleagues of the departments of history at Cayville, St. Augustine, and Mona, as well as other colleagues outside of the department, and of course our usual audience at our weekly seminar series. Welcome to you all. My remarks are primarily about the Festschrift, how it came to be and why. I begin by stating a Festschrift is usually an academic, usually edited collection of papers, articles, celebrating the contribution of a colleague to one's profession during their lifetime. This Festschrift celebrates Carl's contribution to Caribbean history, to the Department of History, and of course by extension to the University of the West Indies. They're not common these days, but they still have purpose and are of academic significance. They place a person's body of work within the context in which he or she charted their academic career, and therefore important as in this case with Carl, for understanding Caribbean historiography and how it has evolved. But they are equally important for celebrating the individual as a person. And of course, this one also celebrates Carl, the individual. Some time ago, I had reason to reflect on a former neighbor of mine and her influence in her community. Elderly, she wasn't active, but she was quietly kind and generous and respectful of all around her, be it with the helpers, the janitor, and her neighbors. And as a result, had an impact on many in a variety of ways. For me personally, I admired her quiet dignity. It caused me to reflect on something I heard Professor Royer say about Walter Rodney, who was about to go overseas to embark upon his postgraduate studies, and the advice he gave him. And this occurred after one of our annual Christmas luncheons, where a few of us remained behind talking for maybe 2 or 3 hours on that particular occasion. And I'm sorry I didn't quietly tape record what he had to say. And it made me think that as much as our parents and upbringing shape us, we're also influenced by those with whom we come into contact with in our daily lives. And that includes those who taught us and those with whom we work. The department at Mona, and no doubt at St. Augustine and Cave Hill, have had within it many good people, solidly committed to advancing Caribbean history through teaching and research, and who have been a pleasure to work with. Carl is eminent among them, and so we honor him with this special issue of the Journal of Caribbean History for his contribution as a historian, as well as for the person he is. Bridget's, Alrich's, and Matthew's beautiful and eloquent personal reflections of Carl resonate with many of us. Finally, the idea for this Festschrift came to me some years ago, possibly after some unobtrusive advice from Carl, possibly in the form of one of his many real-life stories. I mentioned the idea to Swithin Wilmot, who enthusiastically said, "Fine idea, speak with Bridget about getting it, about guest editing it." He would every now and again ask me if I had. He deeply regrets not being able to be here this afternoon and sends his best wishes, and will speak with Carl soon. Thank you, Bridget, and all the contributors who made this possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Professor Monteith, for your remarks. Now, it's Professor Hilary Beckles. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so very much, and I will begin with an apology because it certainly was not my intention to use the force of my office to crash into the top of the program. That was not my intention at all. So I would never do something like that. It wouldn't be my nature. But when I saw the circular, I said, oh my words, I had a meeting. I said, I have to cancel this meeting because I need to be there. And not only for the opportunity to see and greet all of my old colleagues and friends and everyone that I grew up with and who have mentored me and who I have relied upon, but also because Carl was my first head of department. Carl was the person who came to the airport, the Norman Manley Airport, to pick me up, because there's a sense in which I was a bit of an outsider because I was coming from England. I was a bit of a diaspora, wind rush person coming home and not knowing where home is really. So, you know, and I remember very well the plane was delayed by 8 hours because there was a hurricane in the region. And the pilot thought he had to circumnavigate and go to Mexico. And so from London to Mexico and then back to Jamaica. And I thought of Carl must have been out at the airport waiting and wondering what happened to this flight and so on. And he came up there and he put me in his little black VW, you know, and in those days, that black VW was an iconic vehicle in the faculty of arts. And he drove me up to Taylor Hall Flats and said, well, Beckles, this is where you're going to be. And he gave me the keys and he got in his VW and he went home. And as I put the keys in the door and entered the flat, there was a power cut. And I didn't know what the room looked like, and I rushed out looking for Carl, but I saw his car disappearing around the ring road. But you know, but Carl was really a magnificent head. I mean, the first 3 years of being there and working under him, and he welcomed me. He was very flexible. He was very kind. And I found him to be just a remarkable person. I had not met any academic like that before. So peaceful and so calm, doing his work, doing his departmental chores, being very kind to the students, being very kind to his colleagues, and always willing to help. And it was that majesty of his humility that really attracted me to him. And I discovered he had a wonderful sense of humor, but I didn't discover that in Jamaica. I noticed that when he left Jamaica, he became a comedian. So when he was at the conferences around the region, and I know he had a special love of Trinidad, but when you met Carl across the islands and especially in Port-au-Prince, this incredible humorous man came to the surface. And I really admired that schizophrenia of being so serious and Mona. But when he left, he just went into a different world, and he really was humorous, charming, one joke after the next, and he was absolutely fantastic. But I wish to say, though, that, you know, Carl was, to me, at that critical moment, he was the person you could go and discuss anything. And all young people had fears. I mean, Brian and I were around the same time, so the Wilmot came. And I don't see, is Swithin here with us today? And is Swithin with us?
No, he has a family function.
Okay. So, you know, we were the youngsters at the time, Swithin and Brian and myself, and all of us could go to Carl to discuss anything, our anxieties, our fears, student matters, and so on. And he really was very, very decent and very kind. And I will never again in my life forget the kindness that Carl showed and the way in which he just floated above everything. No matter what the difficulty, no matter what the problem, Carl would just float above it and give you a very calm judgment with humor. And that was a healing power he had within our department. So I'm very sorry that I had to kind of jump in and said I need to say a few things, but it's really driven by my absolute respect and admiration for Carl Campbell, and I see him as one of a kind. And Carl, this is entirely deserving that he should be honoring you in this way. I regret, of course, I didn't have the opportunity to write a few words down myself, but I want to thank you, Carl. I want to thank you for all that you have done for the history department, for the faculty of humanities and arts, and for the university as a whole, transcending the campuses as you did, St. Augustine, Cave Hill, and being a part of that entire one UE family. You are quintessentially a one UE man, and I love and respect you for that. So thank you, and please accept my apology.
Yes, thank you, Professor Beckles, and definitely no need to apologize. This is the kind of last-minute surprise that one wants to get. So we are very, very happy that you found time to participate in this event. Our next person in the program to offer her remarks is Emeritus Professor Bridget Brereton, and the floor is Brett. I did not practice this last name. So forgive me for that. But Professor?
Thank you very much, Enrique. First, I really want to thank Kathleen for inviting me to be the guest editor of this special issue. It's really the best assignment I've had for a long, long time, so I appreciate it. Many thanks to all my contributors. Some of you had real difficulties in writing or completing your piece. The pandemic had closed down universities, archives, libraries, so some of you I know puffed up your papers under difficult circumstances. I'm delighted that we were able to take this to completion, to publication late last year, so that the JCH remained on schedule despite all the difficulties. This is very much a tribute to Kathleen and the way she has been editing the journal, as well as the UE Press people. Secondly, since I am the only St. Augustine person on the program, let me just say a few words on behalf of St. Augustine. Let me just say right away that St. Augustine claims Carl Campbell. I don't care if Mona is making any kind of counterclaims. I think I heard the VC making what seemed to be a counterclaim for Mona, but no, we claim Carl. Carl is the pioneer of the history department at St. Augustine. He is the first person ever to teach courses in history at St. Augustine. This was October 1963, when the College of Arts and Sciences, as we called it then, opened its doors and began to teach courses in the humanities, some social sciences, and the natural sciences. Carl was the very first person to do that. With James Millett, who joined a little later, and the late Neville Hall, that trio was a pioneering trio at St. Augustine who established undergraduate teaching and postgraduate research. This is in the 1960s. Fellow contributor Brinsley Samaru joined a little later, sort of late 60s. I got a full-time job at St. Augustine because of Carl. He used to like to remind people about this. It was his decision to leave St. Augustine for Mona, which created the slot that I was lucky to fill. That was in 1972. Kelvin Singh, also a contributor, he joined a bit later in the early 70s. At the same time, in addition to being the pioneering teacher, he was one of those who began postgraduate research at St. Augustine, because he began in the 1960s his important research on the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidad community of free mixed race and free Black people, and his work on the history of education in Trinidad. He and I, in fact, were doctoral students together at St. Augustine in the, we almost coincided, yes, in the late 60s and early 70s. Although he went to Mona, like a good Jamaican wanting to go back home, Neville Hall also transferred from St. Augustine to Mona, I forget exactly when. Nevertheless, Carl came continuously to Trinidad. Sir Hilary has made the point. He had a very special place in his heart for Trinidad. His research, at least in the first, I would say, 2/3 of his academic life, most of his research was centered on Trinidad. So he came back very frequently. He spent summers in Trinidad. I seem to remember he spent one sabbatical year at St. Augustine. So we saw him very, very often in Trinidad after 1972, in addition, of course, to seeing him at ACH and other conferences. So we claim Carl Campbell as our founding father, and he cannot escape it. Above all, I want to thank Carl. I want to thank him for his foundational research on the history of Trinidad and Tobago in the 19th and the 20th centuries. I tried to assess that work in my contribution in the volume. Of course, he also published on Jamaican history and on Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but I think the core of his work is 4 important books, all centered on the history of TNT. He made a huge contribution to our understanding of TNT history in the 19th and 20th centuries. Second, I want to thank him for his very special modes of teaching. He never taught me, but I heard a great deal about his teaching styles. His modes of teaching, the way he mentored people, Sir Hilary has alluded to that, the way he led his colleagues, whether he was head of department or not, the way he supported them. And the two pieces in the JCH by Alaric Josephs and Matthew Smith both speak to his role at Mona as an enabler, a mentor, and an absolute pillar of the Department of History. On a personal note, I want to thank Carl for being a mentor to me, most definitely, for being an extremely supportive fellow researcher. Our research interests have been very close, for being an extremely supportive colleague and a very dear friend ever since the 1960s. Thank you, Carl, and this modest little volume expresses our collective appreciation for everything you have done and everything you are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Professor Barrington. So we have now another professor, this time from Cape Hill. This is Emeritus Professor Woodfield Marshall, who will offer his remarks now. Professor?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Carl, it's good to see you after a rather long time. I wanted to start off by claiming seniority, but Roy O.J. is with us, so therefore I have to back down. But I suppose I can take second place because it seems clear to me that of all of us gathered in our various places, I am the one who probably, I know Carl for longest after Roy O.J. I wanted to say that I must have met Carl in 1957, but when I have searched my memory, I don't really find him there. 57 is when he supposedly came to Mona, and I was a student at Mona at that time. I can only explain his absence from my memory by saying that he was in that other place. He was in a place called Taylor Hall, and I was in Chancellor Hall. So, and for those of you who know the history of the halls, particularly in the 50s and the 60s, you know that there was a sharp line of division between the two places. So, however, we got past that artificial division eventually, and Hillary has already indicated, the Vice Chancellor already indicated the reasons why, of course, he and I, that is Carl and I, would have got together. It was his personality. And what I want basically to focus on are two of the main points of our professional contact over the years. 2 points. The first one has to do with the Association of Caribbean Historians. And I think, little has been said about that, but I want to just to emphasize the role that Carl has played in the formation and in the continuation of that organization. Carl will remember, and Roy probably does remember, that Carl was one of those three persons from UV who was selected in 1969 to go to Guadeloupe to attend what was called a colloquium. The principal of the college there wanted to have this colloquium. Basically, I think he wanted to ensure not just a discussion about some aspects of Caribbean history, but he wanted to forge links between his organization and the Department of History, particularly Mona. Roy O.J. was his contact person, and Roy said to Carl and to Neville Hall and to myself, do you all have anything that you can present to a conference? Because we have this invitation to Guadeloupe. Fortunately, we can say fortunately, all three of us had pieces in preparation and could therefore deliver papers at that conference. So we three went representing the University of the West Indies to that first meeting. That first meeting, as some of you know, is now the first meeting, now called the first meeting of the Association of Caribbean Historians. So Carl, therefore, is a historic figure because he was present there. And I know that he will remember that, like Neville and myself, we kept on asking our host Adelaide, where is this French cuisine? Because you see, we were living in student residence with student food. And I mean, and one of the attractions of going to these French islands was that we would get a taste of French cuisine. But this French cuisine clearly was not present. And I remember Adelaide kept on saying, tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. It never did arise. I mean, in my own case, I decided when the conference was ending to run home to Barbados so that my mother could give me a good meal. But that is by the way. I think the important point that I want to make is Carl was present. And Carl, therefore, became one of those important persons in ensuring that that first meeting, which became a second meeting in Barbados the following year in 1970, that those first meetings eventually morphed into the Association of Caribbean Historians. More than that, as some of you must know, Carl was the first secretary-treasurer of the association when it was formally launched in 1974. So he was a builder in that sense. So while I must say, because I was the president, that I had to lean on him for his common sense and for his ability really to keep me in a sense focused. So what I'm getting at then is that what was put in place, particular things like the bulletin to establish the Association of Caribbean Historians, Carl of course made a major contribution, and in fact that must be noticed and written about. And I'm sorry that I did not in fact write a little piece in the Festschrift about that particular thing. The second thing that I wanted, the second piece of professional contact that I had, about which I think I should say something, is what happened in the early 1980s. In the early 1980s, one of the things that happened inside the department, in our three departments, was that the Douglas Hall, the founder of the Journal of Caribbean History, left Mona, retired from Mona, and I was asked to take over as editor of the journal. Now, the important thing is not the fact that the editorship moved to Cable. The important thing is that in 1982 to 83, we managed to ensure that the journal was fully domiciled inside the University of the West Indies. Up to then, of course, it had been published first by Guinness and Company and then by Heinemann, but that in fact has been a very difficult relationship. And it occurred to me, supported by Carl, that what we needed for the future in order to ensure continuity was that the university should take it over. And fortunately, we had Roy O.J. as chairman of the Research and Publications Committee, and I managed to make a submission to him, which led, therefore, to the journal being put fully into the university. The university, in a sense, became the publisher. The important point there is that when we made that move, Carl was a full part of that operation. I was editor, but Carl was the reviews editor. So what I'm saying here is that, again, this is the second point in which Carl made a historic contribution. I had hoped myself that Carl might even have become editor at some point. But the more important point, perhaps, to notice is this, that it is entirely appropriate, given his connection in the 1980s with the Journal of Caribbean History, that the Festschrift should now be published by the journal. So, Carl, let me say, you have done magnificent work in on a variety of areas in the University of the West Indies, in the discipline of history, with the various institutions connected with history. I congratulate you, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Marshall. The next person on our program, unfortunately, could not make it. As you heard, Professor Monteith, he had a family engagement. So, Emeritus Professor Barry Hickman has had volunteered to give his remarks. Professor Hickman, please.
Greetings all, especially to you, Carl. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Barry.
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you. So far away, not sure. Anyway, it's a great honor. It's a great honor for me to be asked to give a few remarks on this special occasion, and I'm very happy to do my best to stand in for our esteemed colleague Swithin, who's not able to join us today. Now, to the best of my memory, and I'm sure that Carl will correct me immediately if I'm wrong, we did not first meet at Mona, but rather on the streets of London in 1971. I see us walking down Chancery Lane towards the Public Record Office, Carl skipping along and leaning in to catch whatever I was trying to say, probably in the company of other younger scholars who had introduced us. Of the scholars around at that time, the likely suspects were Stafford Neal, Kusha Singh, and John Ahrens, all of whom I had first met at Mona in 1967 when they were history undergraduates. I'm guessing that this must have been the summer of 1971 because Carl was then a lecturer in St. Augustine, working on his doctoral research. Stafford and Kusha became teachers at Cave Hill and St. Augustine respectively before moving on to higher things. In 1971, Carl was definitely our senior and the established academic. When Carl returned to Jamaica in 1972 to teach at Mona, I had been a member of the department for a year. The great reshuffling of personnel across the campuses of UWI, which took place at that post-colonial time, created possibilities for new directions in the study of West Indian history. Carl played an important part in that process, both through his own research and teaching and through his encouragement of the initiatives of other colleagues. There were palpable tensions as well in those days between the Creole creativity of Kamal Brathwaite and the forensic analysis of colonial office gobbets, for example, or the methods of social science history. These tensions came to the surface most obviously during the meetings held to vet examination papers. My memory is that Carl wisely stood outside these camps, establishing himself as a neutral, which enabled him to happily nurture all approaches. Opportunities to promote the department and the discipline of history opened up, especially when Carl became head in 1978. Two things come to mind from that time. The first is that Carl was an active participant in the promotion of the Students' Historical Society, going on weekend retreats and tagging along on fieldwork ventures, such as the archaeology at Mount Pellier. Carl also was not afraid to wield a trowel or wheel a barrow or to organize a fete. As head, Carl also supported the establishment of the Social History Project at Mona, beginning in 1979. I think that probably the worst thing I ever did, Carl, was to leave him in charge of that project in 1981, while I myself went on 2 years' leave. This left Carl with the onerous task of supervising students who were indexing Jamaican magazines from the early 20th century for computer search. Carl did this without complaint, or perhaps he did grumble occasionally, as he had every right to do. It is a marvel to me that the SHP has survived so long, and I thank Carl for his role in getting it established. In his second term as head, beginning in 1987, Carl did much to enable the reality of the archaeology program under Kofi Agorsa. in the midst of Hurricane Gilbert. It is wonderful that archaeology prospered, and we hope that it will continue along those lines. On a more personal note, I'm truly grateful to have had Carl as a colleague and friend over so many years. Indeed, I reflect that our first meeting in the middle of 1971 makes our friendship almost exactly 50 years old. It was always great pleasure for me when living on College Common to find a welcome at Carl's veranda late in the afternoon, any day that found me on my way home from the department, in need of a little dialogue and a cool drink, and perhaps a calming down. Carl was welcoming, ready to talk about the state of the historiography, or the burdens of bureaucracy, or the politics of the day. Sometimes perhaps we talked about the papers in the latest volume of the Journal of Caribbean History. So good wishes, Carl. Walk good, and may the sun long cast its shafts across your veranda in the afternoons.
Thank you very much, Professor Hickman, for your remarks. I believe everybody has been very disciplined and with time, and I think we have we're doing well with the time allotted. And for that reason, perhaps we could have a few minutes, a few extra minutes, if anybody who is not in the program but wishes to offer a few words. I mean, obviously, we will have to be very brief, so maybe we can have more people offering their very quick remarks before we move on to the next item in our program. So please, I believe what is best is probably raise your hand, right? I think we... Okay, yes, Professor Moore?
Yes, I'm glad I can say a few words about Carl. Carl, I must say it was a privilege for me to have known you and to have been your colleague at Mona for almost a quarter of a century. And it was without hesitation that when I was asked, I immediately agreed to participate in this Festschrift. I remember that when I was looking for a job in 1981, you were then the head of department, and somebody said, why don't you go speak with Carl Campbell? I didn't know you then, but I did make an appointment to see you in your office. We spoke. And then to my surprise, I was offered a temporary appointment when Barry Hickman returned to Australia on leave. So that started my position at Mona. And I was there for another 22 years. In fact, during that time, I was your neighbor because we had offices next door to each other for at least 20 years while I was at Mona. Numbers 43 and 44, I think, were the numbers in the New Arts building, as it was called then. So I got to know you pretty well during that period. And that was despite the fact that it was difficult to know whenever you were in office because your door was always closed. So I had to, whenever I wanted to speak to you, I had to get up, knock on your door to see if you were there, and so on. But nevertheless, I got to know you quite well, and I have to say that I enjoyed your collegiality. I'm losing some battery power here, I'm noticing. I enjoyed your collegiality, your friendship, your mentorship, because I joined the department and was a youngster along with our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hillary, and Swithin Wilmot. We were all there pretty much at the same time as youngsters. And you helped to shape our development. So I am delighted to have participated in this endeavor. And I wish you the very best as you continue to do whatever you're doing in the years ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Moore. I think we have time maybe for one more person. If anybody wishes to give some quick remarks. I'm not seeing. Okay, if not, I'm not. Somebody, I can't hear. Apparently, somebody wants to give some quick remarks.
Who is that?
Who's that? Okay.
Professor Oje wants to speak, but the microphone is off. Professor Oje.
Oh. Okay, so Professor Miller and then Professor Auger, like very quick remarks, please, so we can accommodate the two of you.
I would always yield to Professor Auger. I could never go before him.
Okay, Professor Auger, is your mic on now?
Photograph describes me by my technique.
Yes, we can hear you. If you can come a little bit closer to the microphone.
Yes, I can come closer. I don't know whether that means you will hear me. My technician has managed to have her name similar if you look, but without her, I wouldn't have appeared at all. Then I would have appeared as a face with a lot of bric-a-brac behind me, some paintings, most disorderly. Anyway, I got.
Sorry, Professor. We can barely hear you. I don't know if you. Yeah, I don't know where the microphone is located.
Yes.
I don't know if the rest. Maybe it's on our side. I don't know if the rest are hearing properly. Yes, you're hearing well. Okay, so on our side. So just continue, Prof.
Well, my technician is trying her best. I don't know whether you're hearing me.
Yeah, yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad anyway that I am not on the program because I got my invitation from the Asian historian, the Asian member of staff, by email, and I responded 3 times to the same person until the secretary of the department asked me whether I was coming. So I'm not on the program. I haven't prepared anything formally to say, but I'll make one claim that if anybody is the father of Carl in the enterprise, I am the godfather. I was in London at the time when, in the fashion of the university, himself and James Millett were given overseas scholarships. And I was at the Institute of Commonwealth History in the University of London. And I used to meet the 2 of them regularly to speak. When Arthur decided to extend the university to Trinidad, the first ads for the staffing of St. Augustine included 15 professors and a few historians. Luckily, I was able to read the London Times from the Institute, and I saw the ad, and immediately happened, and James Millett to apply for post in St. Augustine. They got the post. I'll tell you how unprepared, Carl has not mentioned it, how unprepared St. Augustine was to receive them. Because by the time that had happened, the Vice Chancellor, Arthur Lewis, had to withdraw the ads which staffed St. Augustine's nearly as full as Mona. In other words, the colonial office was not going to pay for St. Augustine in the same way, and the CARICOM, I don't know if they were called CARICOM at the time, they were not going to either. So Carl and James survived. If they thought you could go survival in a little apartment below the road going up to the monastery. So that was Carl and James Millet's first home as members of the university. At the period, Douglas Hall and myself came down periodically to St. Augustine to assist them in doing the program. So I'm glad that I managed to be entitled. I'm glad that the invitation didn't come and I'm not on the program. So I can only claim to speak very loosely and say I agree with everything my colleagues have been saying about Carl's character, Carl's role in the department of history. His sympathical, normally calm and cool way. I second everybody's speech, so I don't have to make one. I'm very glad that I got the invitation so that I could be here. Now, Simon is listed under my face. He has managed to get me and remove my big citation. And you can't see the paintings and the bric-a-brac behind me. I noticed somebody called Errol Miller who now appeared in the photographs, and I'm glad somebody who's a member of the Faculty of History and Education has responded to the invitation. I'm glad if that person had to be anybody, it should be Errol Miller. Carl, I can tell you no more. You know that my wife and your wife were friends, so that in the earliest days, they were close, and she was always sending messages to your wife about you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for all you have done for the history department and for the university.
Thank you, Professor Oje, and we're extremely happy that you were able to join us. I think it was Professor Miller who also wanted to offer just some final remarks before we resume the program.
Yes, I just had to join in the meeting today when I saw it advertised as one of those persons who have benefited tremendously from the work of Carl. On campus, we usually met in the corridors of the Faculty of Humanities and Education or at the SCR, and more recently in Sovereign Center and other such mundane places. I speak on behalf of the self-adopted foster children of history who depend on historians who record the facts and account for them more than they try to interpret them with, or they put their interpretation separately. So I've benefited tremendously from Carl's work. I've always admired his intellect, his thoroughness, and his humility. Whenever we meet, Carl is always telling me I'm better off than him, and I don't know how quite he was able to discern that. I never agreed. But I want to salute you, Carl, for your work, for your intellect, for your thoroughness, for your longevity and commitment. I salute you on behalf of all of those who have benefited from your work, especially in education, as you're one of the few historians that have done significant work in different countries of the regions and in different eras. Thank you on behalf of those who didn't have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Professor Miller. So here now we are resuming our program, and yes, I would like to just to say that obviously all these remarks express is a way of honoring Professor Campbell. But I think also at the end of the day, what we also have is this Festschrift, this volume of the Journal of Caribbean History. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at the table of contents, but this is like almost among every item here is a must read. It's very unusual that you come across an issue in which like every item, every article in the journal is a must read. Hopefully, I will find time soon to go through them. So we have then just to present the presentation of the Festschrift to Emeritus Professor Carl Campbell, Dr. Alaric Joseph, who will do the presentation. Dr. Joseph?
You can see. No.
Yeah, it's a squirrel.
Yeah. Yes. No.
Okay, I consider it a privilege and a blessing, Professor Campbell, for me to join with the Departments of History of the University of the West Indies to express appreciation for a number of things. One of them is your scholarship. As a student of history, I benefited from the work you did, and I want to say thanks. I also want to express appreciation for your role in building the department over the years. When I joined the department as a student in 1971, you didn't teach me, but when I reached final year, you had to approve my Caribbean Studies topics, and the first time I met you. We didn't have any contact again until I was a postgraduate student, and you became my teacher. So you helped to shape my life, as you did for so many other history students, and for that I'm really thankful. I am especially blessed because I was privileged to be both your student and your colleague. I have not been able to successfully call you Carl, though you have asked me to do so because of that teacher-student relationship. But I want to let you know how much I appreciate, and I'm speaking also on behalf of other students, the example that you set for us. For those of us who came after you as teachers, we looked to you for guidance, and we learned quite a bit from you as a senior colleague. We learned how it is, how we could lead. Though we may not have filled the position of head of department, we watch you lead our department here at Mona, and you were just quiet, humble. You did not lord it over anybody, and we were thankful for that as students, graduate students looking on. I cannot find adequate words to say thanks for the quiet way you pass on your knowledge and how you shared your experience, especially to those of us who were new to academia and the Department of History. When some of us, included in it, of course, had to work with you in your different courses as tutors, and we learned a lot from you about how to conduct our classes. I personally learned how not to be too much of a hard marker. When you monitored our marking in the early encounter to guide us as to how to give those marks. I learned a lot like that, and I learned to understand my students better from just listening to you sharing. So I pray for your health and your long life, probably selfishly because we still want to learn from you. And so on behalf of the Departments of History and Archaeology across the Caribbean, across the University of the West Indies, I would like to present to you this collection of writings as an expression of the high esteem in which we hold you. And we look forward to just interacting with you many, many years to come. May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Just let me say something very short. Alric, I thank you for all the nice things you have written about me and the nice things you have said about me. You and I have had a spiritually calming influence on each other. I believe it originates in some sort of submerged, silent affinities which you and I share. I can say it best in the Jamaican language, that from the time we met in the history department, Miss Spirit take you. Full stop.
So now we have Professor Monteith is going to present also the this issue to Dr. Kerr from the UWI Mona Library.
The same thing over and over.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Get done.
If I may, I just want to say that Prof. Campbell and I go all the way back. I was taught in the Department of History because my first and second degrees are in history. So I'm a librarian, by the way. But I was honored to have been taught by Prof. Campbell in 1977 and also by Prof. Hickman. And we have continued, the relationship has continued because he reminds me of all the good things that have happened in my life because of him. Yes, he keeps reminding me. And then he is a friend of libraries. And so, you know, when I came in as campus librarian some years ago, and I decided to start this project called Celebration of Books, the person I thought of who would be the guest speaker for that first Celebration of Books was Professor Carl Campbell. And I am grateful for the years of the relationship that we have had and the mentoring that he has had on my life. Thank you so much, Carl. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carl. And now we're moving on to the last item on our program. Last but definitely not least is the reply from Emeritus Professor Carl Campbell. Professor Campbell?
Yeah. Well, thank you. How many minutes have I got for this reply? Because
they left 30 seconds for you. No, I assume that it is your show, so the floor is yours.
Oh, I thought we had to get over to here in one hour. Anyway, Vice Chancellor, friends, colleagues, I shall not be very long. My first task is to say thanks to the originator or originators of this incredible idea of a special issue of the Journal of Caribbean History in my honor. I suspect, and now it has been confirmed, that Professor Kathleen E.A. Monteith, the current editor, has had a lot to do with it, and so too did Professor Bridget Burton, who undertook the task of assessing my contribution to history writing in Trinidad. But if there are other concealed conspirators, I thank you all. And of course, I have to thank all my former colleagues on the 3 campuses, a host of retired professors who made the publication possible by writing articles. You all might have heard that there are 3 stages of retirement. The go-go stage, the go-slow stage, and the no-go stage. I'm happy to see that all my colleagues are in stages 1 and 2. It is really amazing how much good history is written after retirement. So again, my thanks to Professors Woodfield Marshall, Kelvin Singh, Brinsley Samaru, Barry Hickman, Brian Moore, and Swithin Wilmot. Professor Trotman, I don't know if you're anywhere around, but I have not seen you for a long time. And your face has faded from my memory, but thanks, and keep the Caribbean research flag flying in Canada. Professor Matthew Smith, but before I do that, there's something I've been wanting to say for a long time to the Vice Chancellor. And it has to do with the circumstances and the day when I met him coming off the plane at the airport. He was coming to Jamaica, I think, for the first time. I didn't know who he was, so I kept on looking for this tall, Bajan man with some kind of a cloak, since he was coming from England. And I asked several other persons, "Are you Hilary Beckles?" In London and other big airports, they have signs you hold up at the airport. If you don't know the person, you write the name of the person. Well, I didn't do anything like that, but I asked several other persons, "Are you Hilary Beckles?" No. Eventually, I saw this guy coming down, and I said, "This has to be Beckles now." And so it was. And I said to you, I don't know if you remember this, I said to you, "Welcome to Jamaica." And you say, "Thank you, sir." So, Sir Hilary, I want to tell you that you called me sir before I had reason to call you sir. Yes, sir. Now, Professor Matthew Smith, I don't know if you're out there, but if you're out there listening, I am so sorry to see that the coronavirus, is threatening to unseat you in London just as soon as you sat in the new professorial chair up there. Professor, I hope things work out well for you up in London. Yeah. You said one thing, Professor Smith, which is very true. You said that I am essentially a departmental man. And so it is, so it was, and so it will ever be. To my mind, there is something called the Mona History Department, which is bigger than the change in academics who work in it. And there are other staff members who think like that on the other campuses as well. Incidentally, there's something which I want to say as I see Professor Auger here. How many people here know that it was Roy Auger who supervised my MA thesis? Somehow this fact doesn't seem to emerge. Of course, when I say supervise, it was in the fashion of Roy Auger is not looking at anything every day, but I still have pages and pages of my work with the peculiar, distinctive, elegant writing in pen of Roy Auger. His writing has not changed in umpteen years. If Roy Auger writes a note to me now, it looks like something he wrote in 1967 or something like that. Roy, I don't know how you, well, I don't know the very latest, but I don't know how you managed to keep your writing all these years. Now, the year 2020, last year, we all know what an incredible year it was. We are all in the middle of this virus pandemic. But there were special events which happened during last year which have special meaning to special people. I know some football fanatics who think that the death of Diego Maradona last year was the biggest thing, and they still talk about this thing. Now, my biographer, if I ever have one, my biographer is going to be able to say that 2020 was the year when the Journal of Caribbean History chose to honor Carl Campbell. Long after I am dead, and nowadays I think of death very often, long after I am dead, this publication in its physical or digital form. Maybe it will be in our library. I don't know if Dr. Carr has any plans to preserve it in any special way, but long after I am dead, it will survive in the library as a mark of my colleagues' wisdom or of their folly. Now, we are in the midst of this pandemic, and some of us, depending on our profession, have been made to feel socially useless. My history colleagues and I, as peddlers of cultural ideas, are not regarded as frontline workers. You know, it's one of these catchphrases going around now, the frontline workers. But listen, my friend, from another perspective, I am delighted to read in this journal that I, Carl Campbell, I was, I am, and will for ages to come be regarded as a frontline worker in the history production on Trinidad. That is what Professor Burton is asserting in her assessment of my contribution. And Burton should know I am a frontline worker. A word about the Journal of Caribbean History. I was never the editor. The system of rotation was coming my way when I was about to retire. So I was never the editor. But I can boast, although I'm not given to boasting, I can claim, I want to change the word, I can claim 3 achievements in relation to the Journal of Caribbean History. How many of you here know that I was published in the very first issue of the Journal of Caribbean History? I am perhaps the first West Indian, but I'm not sure if the others were West Indian. I could say I was the first member of staff to have an article published in the Journal of Caribbean History. This is in May 1970. But all of this happened accidentally. Professor Douglas Hall, who was the editor and top man in the journal, had his writers all lined up for the first issue. I was not one of them. You know, I was a small fry. I was not one of them. But someone failed to deliver, and Hall looked for alternatives. There I was with a ready draft of an article on post-emancipation education in Jamaica. It was a good article, the result of some 10 years of research. It still is the flagship article on this subject. It used to be heavily used by A-level Cape history students in the secondary school. But I got in accidentally. So my second achievement, however, was not accidental. In the year 1981, some 10 years after the foundation of the Journal of Caribbean History, I was the first West Indian to publish a book review in the journal. I think I can say that I and Barry Hickman, because Hickman had a review in that journal as well. I think I can say that I and Barry Hickman pushed the Journal of Caribbean History in the direction of book reviews. In my case, what happened was this. I bought a copy of Roger Buckley's book, Slaves in Red Coat, published in 1979. I reviewed it and sent it to the editor. Nobody asked me to review anything. The publisher did not send me the book. In those days, publishers sent books to be reviewed to Elsa Gavaya, not to me. I reviewed Buckley's book because as the new editor of the Jamaica Historical Review at that time, I was actively seeking reviews of history books on Jamaica. And I did not understand why the Journal of Caribbean History was not reviewing books on Caribbean history. Maybe the editor was not getting any books. My third claim to fame in relation to the Journal of Caribbean History is an extension of my 1981 book review initiative. What happened was this. Professor Woodfield has alluded to my early association with the leadership of the Association of Caribbean Historians, and so it was. From that association, I became very aware of the distance between history writing and historians of the English-speaking Caribbean on the one hand, and the French and Spanish-speaking historians on the other hand. Language was a real barrier, especially for us English speakers. And so I decided to review a book written in French by one of our French Antillean collaborators, the famous Jacques Adélaïde Merland. Again, nobody asked me to review this book. No publisher sent me the book. I acquired it from Adélaïde at one of the conferences. I sent in my review to the editor of the Journal of Caribbean History, and it was published, much to the delight of Adélaïde, who mentioned this amazing development in a subsequent conference. And just in case you academics think that I used to put book reviews on my CV, I never put them on my CV, so don't think that I was trying to extend my CV. Now, I subsequently reviewed another French book. This one was written by Madame Liliane Cholot, a very faithful member of the Association of Caribbean Historians. She was a librarian as well as a historian. And she wrote a book on the history of Guadeloupe, I think. And my friends, let me tell you something. My French capabilities were not first class. It was a labor of love for me to be reviewing history books written in French. But one of the things which I definitely got from my association with the association, I didn't mean to say that, from my association with the Association of Caribbean Historians, is that I got interested in French and started going to classes, and I already knew Spanish, so up to now I'm a lover of languages. I'm a perpetual student of French. And this helped me when I widened my research to Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Martinique and Guadeloupe and so on. I even tried for a while Dutch, but that one defeated me, so I backed away from Dutch. Now, I want to tell two little stories before I answer. Two little stories having to do with Trinidad, my sojourn in Trinidad, 1963 to 1972. One story has to do with Dr. Eric Williams. In 1963, I was appointed to start history teaching at St. Augustine. Now, consider my situation. I was part of the second wave of the new generation of West Indian nationals chosen by providence or foresight or preparation to research, teach, and publish the new West Indian history of the mid-20th century, let us say the 1950s to the 1970s. I was interviewed for the St. Augustine job while in London. And sitting on the interviewing panel was Elsa Govile. Can you imagine that you're going to a committee in London to be interviewed for a job and you see your old professor looking at you and you thought she was in Jamaica? I was shocked, but it all worked out fine. No, I distinctly recall that Elsa Govile was the one who asked me the final question in the interview. And it was impossible for me to answer the question. Here the question she asked me. How was I going to promote the teaching of history on the St. Augustine campus? Now, I mumbled an answer, but it was stupidness really, because there I was, a young and experienced fellow going out to his first job. I'd never been to Trinidad before, you know, but the point about it, my answer was not the answer, but I think that by that time in the interview, they had probably decided to give me the job anyway. So my answer didn't matter. But when I got down to Trinidad in October 1963, there was a hidden factor. I don't know if this ever affected Bridget, but the hidden factor was Dr. Eric Williams. I found myself young, inexperienced, unknown historian, teacher, in an island where the chief minister, I don't know if he was called prime minister at that time, the chief minister or the prime minister was Dr. Eric Williams, the most internationally distinguished Caribbean historian, who saw himself as the only Caribbean historian. I mean, Eric Williams at that time was the only Caribbean historian with big transnational ideas about Caribbean history. And listen to this, I was also a foreigner in Trinidad, a foreign Creole from Jamaica who still had to get a work permit to teach at St. Augustine. UWI or no UWI, I had to get a work permit. There was no doubt that I was living in the intellectual and political shadow of Dr. Eric Williams. To cut a long story short, I felt I had to be careful in my lectures to respect the big ideas of Dr. Eric Williams, even when some qualification needed to be made to some of them. Dr. Eric Williams himself, as far as I know, paid no attention to history teaching at St. Augustine. But after a certain Trinidadian historian joined the staff of the history department, I see here, the department began to look from the outside like an anti-PNM department, an anti-Williams department. I felt that there were people in the student audience who were listening. And I have already told the story of how one evening a mature Indian student, possibly a teacher, jumped up at the back of my lecture room and said, "That is not what Dr. Williams said." It was a lecture about slavery and slave abolition. I had to navigate myself carefully and honestly out of this verbal trap. That is not what Dr. Williams said. Now, my second Trinidad story has to do with Professor Brereton, or Dr. Brereton as she then was. If Dr. Eric Williams was in the background of my consciousness, Bridget was in the foreground of my intellectual encounters in Trinidad. You know, about 6 years ago, in 2014, I was called on to assess Bridget Burton's contribution to history writing in Trinidad in one of these journals in her honor. Now, I wrote in one of my early drafts, submitted to the guest editor, I am not calling anybody's name, but there was a certain Guyanese professor teaching in the United States who was the guest editor. Now, before I get to the guest editor, let me tell you something briefly about Donald Wood. Now, Donald Wood was an Englishman who was a pioneer social historian on Trinidad. And Donald Wood and Bridget got on very well. And I, as somebody who understood the development of the sociology and the historiography of Trinidad in the 19th century, I felt that Bridget found Donald Wood to be a lovable person. So I wrote in one of my drafts assessing Bridget's work that in the socio-intellectual relations of Bridget and Donald Wood, Bridget found Donald Wood to be lovable. Well, the guest editor, the certain professor from Guyana who was teaching in the United States, he struck out the word lovable. Maybe he found, thought it was emotionally suspect or emotionally overcharged, but he struck it out. No. When I got back the draft with the word struck out, I went to the Oxford Dictionary and I looked up the word lovable and I said, you know, I think this is the exact word I want for this relationship. So in my final draft sent to this certain guest editor, I put back the word lovable. And my friend, the guest editor struck it out again. Now, I'm going to end by telling you all something, which is this. However suspect the word lovable might be in talking about relations between historians, I want this evening, the 29th of January 2021, I want to say, in the absence of the restraining hand of that scrupulous Guyanese editor, I want to say that I, Carl Campbell, find Bridget Burton to be a lovable colleague and historian. Amen. 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 I thank you.
And we thank you, Professor Campbell. With this, we have come to the end of this event. I hope that you all enjoyed. I think many memories to speak to Professor Campbell's contribution, his service, And I think, after all, I think it's this issue of the Journal of Caribbean History, which is the best way of, as Professor Campbell put it, is that for posterity, our sort of like well, and I think the way that we have expressed all of this, our sentiments and our awareness of how much it has done, is put here and is for posterity. I think the best way, because I look at the table of contents, there are articles there that I can think that we can share with our students without a doubt. These are things that are remarkable topics, new ways of looking at topics that have been explored before, and some of them not. And I think that this is, as I said, the best way of paying homage to Professor Campbell. With that, I would like to thank. Yes. Yes. I would like to thank all of you who participated actively in today's event. I would also like to thank to all of you who have just attended this event. And as I said, I will encourage you to get a copy of the journal, of this issue of the Journal of Caribbean History, read the article, share it with your students, and that's it. Just finally, on a final note, let me tell you that the event has been recorded and it will be put up on our YouTube channel, on the Department of History and Archaeology YouTube channel. So for those of you who might, those of you who were not able to attend live, or just in case you want to watch it again and listen to this. I'm an oral historian, so there are all those memories that I think that are worth listening to.
Enrique.
Yes.
Enrique.
Yes, Professor.
May I be sent a copy of the both the journal and the
yes, we will send you a copy, Professor. No doubt about it. And the final.
I would also like the people present to sign the program that you have before you, so that I will have them as memorials.
Okay. Yes, we will do that as well. And final thing is just to express gratitude to Ms. Rodian Dennis Copeland, for her work making this event possible, and of course Professor Monteith, who, as I said in the beginning,